Hi everyone, I'm going to start this video off just to let you know that this is going to be a little bit more technical than just a normal how to build a workflow type scenario. What I actually had a need to do earlier was to build some workflow that actually used a random number that's generated. Now, with out-of-the-box Nintex workflow, we actually have an action called build string. Now, if I open this up and I click on the insert reference button, you'll find there's a number of different tabs that you can insert into this build string action to actually build out your dynamic text. One of the things that you'll find is this inline functions where you can start doing some calculations and things like getting the length of strings, doing converting text to upper to lower, XML encoding, decoding, trimming, and padding, things of that nature. You also have this new GUID, which is actually a really cool one if you want some random piece of text. What I actually had a need for is the ability to generate a random number. So what I did was actually created a custom inline function. Now, to build a custom inline function, you do need to do some .NET development. So what we'll do is we'll actually jump into Visual Studio, and you'll see exactly what needs to be done. You start off with building a class library, a .NET class library. In there we have your namespace. I've called it VT inline functions. You create yourself a class called VT random or whatever you want to call it, and then you create your methods that you want to expose or functions you want to expose as inline functions into Nintex workflow. I've actually created 3 and they all have the same name, and I'll actually tell you about why I did it this way. One is just called random. It takes no parameters and it just gives me a random number. Now the number is going to be between 0 and the maximum that an integer is allowed in .NET. The next one is random that takes a maximum value. So I want a number between 0 and some maximum value. And then there's also a random function that says I want a number between x and y, a minimum value and a maximum value. Now the one thing to note is these are all static functions. This is important when you're actually adding this to the Nintex workflow. They need to be static functions. So you actually find that if there are static functions that are already exposed by Microsoft through .NET classes, you could actually simply just add them without actually writing any code. The random class that's inside .NET doesn't have any static functions that it exposes, so I had to create my own in here. Now that's all you need to do for the code, right? You can see there's not a whole lot to it. Now some of the things you will need to do is you need to make sure that the assembly that you're building is actually a .NET Framework 3.5. I'm building this for Nintex Workflow 2013, so I found that I needed to add it as a 3.5 framework assembly. The other thing I needed to do is go into signing. I need to sign the assembly, so I actually have to make it a strongly named assembly. That's just required. Now, once you build this, you'll actually get your DLL. You have a number of things you can do here now. First of all, if you have multiple SharePoint farm servers, you will need to deploy this DLL to the GAC of each one of those servers. This is because Nintex Workflow could potentially run on any one of those servers, so this assembly needs to be there. It needs to be on every server. You can do this by just simply dragging this DLL to the GAC or C/Windows/assembly, or you can actually build yourself a solution for SharePoint that when you deploy it, deploys the assembly to all the servers. So it's a really personal preference. Since my environment is just a single server, I decided to just drag it to my server and to the GAC there. The next thing you need to do is you need to go to your server where you initially ran the Nintex workflow installer. When you do that, you'll find that there is a folder called C/program file/Nintex workflow 2013 or 2010, depending on which version you're using. In there is an executable called nwadmin. It has a number of operations. The one we're interested in is the add inline function. So this you actually call, so you can, I've actually got this text file here. I can actually call this command line. And what we're doing is we're adding this particular inline function to an Nintex workflow. This is where you specify what you want to call the alias, the function alias, or the inline function, the assembly, and you can see it's a strongly named assembly. And you have a few other things like what the namespace is, the type name, which is just the class name, the method you want. And you notice I'm using random, even though I have, and this is why I've actually used 3 different uh, functions in here, all with the same name. And finally, you have the description to let the users know what this inline function does. And the last one is the usage to kind of give them an idea of how this particular action or inline function needs to be used. You run this, it adds it to the in-text workflow. What that means is that when you go back to your workflow and you open up this build string action, click on the insert reference, you'll actually find under inline function now a random inline function. And you can see here's my text generates a random number and tells me some examples of how I can use it. And you can see I've actually used it here, fn-random, and I'm specifying that I want a number between 0 and 100. And I'm storing it in a text variable here. That's just because build string actually creates text pieces of text. Now that's pretty cool. You can see how easy it was to actually create a custom inline function to deploy it, and now it's available in the workflow designer. The added benefit to doing this is when you actually go to Nintex Forms, Nintex Forms talks to Nintex Workflow. And when you go to add an inline function, you'll actually find that if you go into Nintex Forms Designer and we'll go into somewhere where you can put in an expression, click on the Insert Reference button, you'll find that under Inline Functions, if you scroll down, there's our random inline function. So not only are you building a custom inline function that's available in Nintex Workflow, it's automatically available in Nintex Forms as well. So now you can start building out your custom inline functions and making it available in both products without having to do double work or anything or double deployments. Hopefully this is helpful for you guys. Feel free to add comments to the end of this post or any questions you guys might have about building custom inline functions, and I'll be happy to point you in the right direction. Thanks very much for listening in, and hopefully see you in the next video.